Hey everybody, this is going to be a quick little recording of some supplemental, more advanced things in Rhino and addressing some of the issues people have come up with. So in this file I have a bunch of different things that I'm going to show you in no particular order. Starting with one of the questions that someone had, which is about drafting at odd angles. So you see this grid on the ground here. That's referred to as a C-plane or your construction plane. Anytime you're drafting, and I currently have ortho snap set on, so it will always draft perpendicular to that grid. Well, the issue arises if you want to draft along a different grid. Say you have a building that has an angle on it and you want to keep things perpendicular to that angle. This is a pretty easy thing to fix. What you will do is type in C-plane. It gives you a whole bunch of options up here that you can see. I'm going to use the 3-point because I found that one to be easiest. And then basically it's going to allow me to draw a new plane with a new origin. So I'm just going to do this object here that I want to now be on my defining my reference plane. I'm just going to click aside and click along the same angle and hit enter. Now my C-plane is rotated. So now when I'm drafting, it will always snap to that. So things will remain orthogonal just on a new axis. To get back to it, to what you had before, if you go down to Set C-plane under the view, and then you can go to one of the defaults, or the easiest one is open up named C-planes, which actually will look like this. You can actually save this. So I've already saved this one by calling it a rotated plane, but all you would do is just, once you have your plane set up the way you like, do save as and name this something. And then to go back to the original, all you have to do is double click world top, which is your original C-plane, and that will snap back. And then clicking here will take you to the one you've already created. So when I go back to world top, I will be drafting perpendicular to that axis. And then anytime I go to the rotated plane, I will be drafting perpendicular to that axis. So that's really useful when you have angles in buildings. All right, so that's one little thing. The next is someone was asking about some unique roof shapes. So this guy here is just kind of a representation of, say, a conal type roof. It was made by just drawing out a series of arcs and performing a loft between them. And that's really about it. Of course, the loft has different options. We can do smooth, tight, straight lines, normal. And we can do lofts with as many curves as we want. So I could add in a few more here. So these all started as the same curve. I just went in and started pulling the points around until I got it to be exactly the type of roof shape that I was looking for. So maybe something like that. Hit OK. So if I didn't want there to be this edge at the bottom that is perfectly aligned, maybe that edge wants to pop up some, I could, of course, pull my profiles up, maybe make some more adjustments. So now it will follow that edge. The other way of doing this is, say I already have the shape, this one here, and I want to actually make a cutout of it. I made a cylinder here and stretched it. I'm just going to bring that into place. You can see here I have a nice overlap on the shape. I'm going to stretch this a little bit more, just using the gumball here, not being too precise, but it looks like good overlap. Whenever you're doing cuts to things, you want to make sure it has nice overlap and the things aren't landing exactly on edges. I'm going to, so initially I would try the Boolean command. It's not going to work. The reason being is Boolean likes to be between two solid objects, and this is not a solid object. So the other way of doing it would be I could just use the split command, which will ask me for a cutting object, which is right here, hit enter. Now I can pull this over, and I now have cut out that shape. Now another thing you'll probably want to do is, anytime you have a surface like this that is a trimmed surface, this is essentially infinitely thin. It has zero thickness to it. And in general, we never want to really deal with zero thickness surfaces. They don't exist in real life. You're not modeling anything that exists like this. Even when you're modeling like a pane of glass in a building, which is very thin, it still has thickness. All objects do, of course. To give this thickness, the easiest way is just do the offset surf command, or offset SRF. And then I'm just going to hit enter. It will give me some errors that indicate the direction. So I could hit flip all if I wanted to expand out. I can set the distance. It's going to go to 1. And I just hit enter. And then now I have a poly surface, a closed poly surface with actual degree of thickness to it. So that's that. Next, some people had some issues with drawing out sweeps, especially sweeps that are not two-dimensional, meaning the curve that you were basing it on is going up or down a flight of stairs or something like that. So the way I did this example is I drew out in the sort of above view where I wanted my curve to be. Then looking at it in perspective, I just started grabbing some of these points. And if you don't see the points, selecting them should turn them on, but you can also type in the command points on and they will stay on. You can take these and just start lifting them up. So that's giving that curve some three-dimensionality to it. Same here. If I really wanted to be precise, I could snap each one of these or make them very precise in their heights, or make a smooth curve by each one having them go at different heights or something. But either way, I have a smooth little curve. So that's what I did for this guy here. And I drew out a little rectangle to go with it. So if I do the sweep command and select the first rail, oops, let's do that again. Sweep, first rail, and cross section. Oh, sorry about that. And then I'm just going to hit enter. You can see it's starting to follow this. Now there's two main different settings that you want to look at here. So one is freeform, which you can see makes a rotation in this, and that's because it's just trying to follow the curve of the shape. So it will allow our object that's being created to deform and rotate in order to follow that as accurately as it can. If we want to make sure that all of our verticals stay nice and vertical, if we go to the row-like option, now you may have to set an axis, which is just what you want it to align to. So in this case, I just want to make sure it's aligning to the vertical axes. So I could do that. And then it wouldn't change anything because it was already correct. But that could be an issue for you if you're having trouble and making all kinds of wonky shapes. So that was that. The next was some people were looking at some interesting roof shapes. So this is actually an example of a teardrop roof that I was going to make. I drew out the plan of it, and then I have the ridge line at the top of the roof. This is closest to the Zumthor Chapel project. It has a roof something similar to this. With these two lines, actually, all I need to do is just type in the command loft. Now, you may notice that this ridge line here doesn't go all the way, and I've actually elevated it too. So it's floating above. I drew it initially on the ground surface, and I just sort of pulled it up using the gumball tool. But I'm just going to select one side and that center ridge line and type in loft, and it's going to connect the two. And that could be all you need. Of course, I might do that again and see, so that's normal. What if I did straight sections? So straight sections actually won't do anything different because they're inherently straight when you only have two curves that you're connecting between. And then to get the other side, I would simply type in the mirror command, which is just mirror, draw the axes that I wanted to flip on, and now I have two of these. I could, of course, join these two surfaces together, typing in join. Now it's one surface, and I could do the offset surface, and I'm going to flip them again so I go outwards. So that went a little bit weird. Sometimes offset surface does do some weird things. Let's try having it grow the other direction. See if that fixes it. It looks a little bit more accurate, a little less obnoxious. So the other thing, get rid of this guy, is of course, I could decide that I want to have a little bit more control over that. There's a command that you can do in Rhino called tween curves, which is just between two curves. It'll ask you how many you want. I'm going to type in, let's do 2. And essentially it creates two curves that are interpolated between your first curve, the lowest one, and your top curve. Now if I do a loft, it's going to use all 4 of these as part of that process, which allows me to, I could take these individually and start manipulating them. So I'm actually going to take this guy and do a scale 1D, or in one direction, and align it here and just start pulling it. So maybe I'll do that and do the same thing here. So now if I do a loft between these 4, you can see it's going to hold to those. And gives me a bit more control over that exact shape. Next question that I got was about making corrugated material, such as a corrugated roof or corrugated cardboard. So I have an example of what that can look like here. The easiest way to do this is actually just drawing out the profile of corrugation. So I drew some here, which is currently just a line. It's been all joined, so it's one long curve. The way I did this was just the basic arc command, drew an arc, took that, copied it, rotated, and snapped them together. So I got the kind of sine wave shape you see here. Joined them. So now it's one curve. I then did the array command, or array linear specifically, and snapped the first point to the last point, and basically got a whole bunch of these in a row. Type in join. They're one curve now. And I'm going to go back to my perspective view. Perspective, I can do extrude curve and just kind of extrude that. Again, this is a completely one-dimensional surface. So I may decide that I want to, or I probably should, offset that surface. I'm not going to do 1 because I know that's probably going to be too big. It's probably 0.25. And you can see here, I now have thickness and a proper profile. So you can also do the same thing, of course, using the sweep command. So I drew a 3-dimensional profile here, which is just this little weird arc. And just going to do the sweep 1 command with using this guy as the rail, that guy's the cross section, and you get that. So if you happen to curve your corrugated roof material, that's what that would look like. Okay. Next one, someone was trying to recreate some wire trees that they had made. So the way I'd recommend doing that is actually just going into a side view. And since wire trees are really inherently random, that doesn't really matter too much. I'm going to turn on the project toggle down here at the very bottom. And of course, that allows me to do is no matter what I'm snapping to, it will always be drawing on the C-plane or the grid that you see in front of us, just to keep it nice and flat. So I'm just going to draw out a nice little curve. Maybe this is a representation of your wire. I'm not actually too concerned about it being perfect. Now, of course, that curve that I just drew, which is this guy, and I'm actually just going to hide everything else. Of course, that command that I just did, which is super useful, is this button here, the isolate objects. You can also type it in, and it'll hide everything else in your model. Currently, this is a 2-dimensional curve, so I'm actually just going to start playing with it by using the gumballs to sort of rotate some things and move stuff around to make this into more of a 3-dimensional curve. So that's not quite as bland and ordinary. Okay, so nice little 3-dimensional curve going on here. And then just simply type in the pipe command. And it'll just ask me for some dimensions there. I just did a 0.25. It depends on what units you're working in. But have a nice little wire. Unhide everything by right-clicking the light bulb up here. And I could start taking these wires and just kind of putting them together. And I can start to get to that funky wire tree look going. I'm not going to be super precise about it. If you were exactly trying to recreate a wire tree that you made by hand, you'd probably really need a 3D scan. It's too irregular of an object to measure. Okay, so the last thing I was going to cover is this big word here, aliases. What this is essentially your keyboard shortcuts. This is an incredibly useful thing, especially once you get using Rhino a lot more. I'm going to type in document properties, and under document properties, I'm going to scroll down to where it says aliases, which is right here. Essentially, there's a bunch that are already built in, and there's a few that you can add yourself that are sort of simple. So since I am a daily Revit user, and Revit works on sort of 2 keystroke commands, so basically every command in Revit can be done by 2 keystrokes. So if you want to draw a wall, it's WA. If you want to draw a line, DL, a whole bunch of things like that. I actually don't want to have to relearn new keystrokes, so I basically just put in the things that I use in Revit in here. So DL, I want to make it do polyline, and all you have to do is just type in the command you want it to default to. So let's see what else I would do. So it looks like I've already added trim in here, TR, that's a useful one. MV, it's another Revit command for move. CO for copy. MI for mirror. And now I can just go a little bit faster because all I have to do is type in MI and it'll turn on the mirror command. So that's really useful. Again, especially once you get more used to using the keyboard shortcuts and you can make your own. I always adjust these things in every program. So I've adjusted some things in Revit, adjusted some things in Rhino and SketchUp as well. When we get to SketchUp, I'll talk about all of my defaults, and you can basically remap every command in that, which is pretty useful. But yeah, setting those up for yourself and making them as easy as you can, always a good idea. I think, actually I'm going to do one other thing that's kind of unplanned right now. I'm just going to draw out a random surface real quick. So this is just a normal flat rectangular surface. I'm going to type in the command rebuild. What that's going to do is subdivide this thing to a grid. Let's do 20 by 20. Actually, you know what? I think 10 by 10 is fine. I take it back. So I now have this plane, and any 2D or any single surface will be able to do this. You can rebuild any surface that's a single surface. You can't quite rebuild 3-dimensional surfaces very well, but you'd have to break them down. But rebuild works very well on 2D surfaces. But now what I can do is type in the command points on, and essentially it'll give me a control point for every single one of these points here. Now I want to start selecting a bunch of points. Unfortunately, if I do that, I'm going to snap to the surface there, and that's not going to be very useful for you. I'm going to type in selection filter. And what this will be is this little box that shows up here. I actually usually just take this and drag it down to the bottom right-hand corner. You can't see it because it's under my, move my text box for a second. So if I take this guy, snap it here, it will just, it will start living in my bottom bar. So I'll always have that available for me. Put that back. But essentially what I can do now is unselect surfaces. So now no matter what I do, I can't select a surface, so I can only start selecting these points. And now I can take these points and start dragging them up. And essentially what I'm able to do now is some what I'd call soft editing. Soft manipulation of this surface, adding detail. Maybe if you're making a ground surface or something that's a little bit more organic, this is a good way to start to do that sort of soft modeling process. It's kind of just like moving clay. Hitting escape will make those go away. You can see here I can't select that surface right now because I have to go back and make sure surfaces are selectable. And again, that was selection filter that does that. Now I could rebuild this, and the more points I have, the more fine-grained detail I would be able to have, but I could also take away detail. So I'm going to go to 4, 4. And it actually just eliminated most of my detail because there wasn't enough points there to approximate what I did. You can see it still has some manipulation here, but it just doesn't have enough control points to actually keep that level of detail. I'm going to undo that real quick and do the opposite. Rebuild, and this time I'm going to go up to, say, 50, 50. And I have a really complex surface. So now if I wanted to do points on again, and I'm going to deselect my ability to select surfaces, and now I can do really fine-grained manipulation to this surface. Again, escape will make those points go away. I'm going to uncheck or check again the surfaces selection, so my selection filter will allow me to do that. And that's going to be about it for this demo. Let me know if there's other things that I can cover, but these are some a little bit more complicated, a little bit more advanced techniques. Thanks, everyone. And actually, just to remind you, you have your two, I've created early on the different C-planes. I can also use those in 3D modeling. It doesn't have to be just that the top view. So those will appear anywhere. But I want to make sure I go back to my default so I don't lose that. Anyways, that'll be it. Thanks.